I am incredibly happy to have Laura Edelson with us. She is, I believe, the very first chief technologist at the US Department of Justice Antitrust Division. It's also a surprise to me what you will present to us today, so it makes me very excited. Thank you so very much for accepting our invitation. And if you're all ready, I think the floor is yours. You have half an hour. You could divide that as you please. So thank you so very much once again, Laura, and please, you can take the floor.
Hi, Thibault, and hello to everyone. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I am the first Chief Technologist of the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice. And, you know, it's a real pleasure to join everyone here today at the Computational Antitrust Project. Not everyone might be aware of this, but the Department of Justice was actually a founding participant in the Computational Antitrust Project all the way back in 2019. And I'm really honored to be part of that continuing effort, that continuing relationship. One thing that I think everyone here can agree on is that enforcers should consider every available tool to protect competition. And, you know, I should start by saying that I'm a computer scientist and an engineer. I'm not a lawyer or I'm not an economist, but that means that I just can't help but be excited about the potential to integrate these new cutting edge tools like big data, like the new analytical tools that we've been developing into the centuries-long tradition of antitrust. Now, being excited about technology is a technologist's MO, I know, but I've noticed that sometimes when a computational approach is introduced into an existing field, it's sometimes treated as a sea change. But I just don't believe that this is the case for antitrust. Computational methods are just the next set of tools that enforcers are picking up. And they're ones that are potentially very useful to understand computationally driven and data-driven markets that are becoming much more common in the American economy. So as I said, I'm a computer scientist, and in my field of computer science, I have really had a front row seat to American innovation at its best. And I'm keenly aware that the green field for innovation and competition that we have fostered since this nation's founding has been protected by antitrust. But I'm also aware that market realities are always changing. And that means that we have a duty to make sure that we are keeping up with those changes as well. You know, in software development, where I had a career for many years, we have a saying, you need to eat your own dog food, which simply means that in order to understand technology, it helps to use it. Similarly, researchers and enforcers who are trying to analyze data-driven markets may also use tools like big data analysis, like algorithmic auditing, to try to, do their jobs. Excuse me. Okay. So first, I'd like to take a step back for just a few minutes. At its best, the innovation and economic dynamism in this country have allowed us to push technological and scientific progress forward in ways that have made people's lives, made Americans' lives safer, better, more prosperous. And American innovation in particular has shown that when competition isn't thwarted, it can create more than just a better mousetrap. It can birth entire new industries that supplement and supplant old ways. The telegraph, the telephone, the light bulb, the transcontinental railroad, later in our lifetimes, the personal computer, the smartphone, the modern internet. They all owe their start to this competitive American landscape that fosters innovation. Antitrust is foundational in protecting this innovation cycle. Dominant players can potentially use their power to tamp down disruptive innovation that threatens their market power. Without without intervention, this can stagnate competition. Antitrust enforcement, by keeping the space for competition open, has really been the handmaiden to American innovation. It has helped create the conditions necessary for new innovative industries. And antitrust can only continue to do that if it evolves to continue to meet markets as they grow and change. Competitive innovation has made the economy more complex. It has made it more dynamic. Modern markets create increasingly sophisticated technologies, and they integrate them across their business. This is true in really obvious places like digital markets, but it's also true in really ancient industries like agriculture, where increasingly data, software, cutting edge hardware are all being integrated. You know, it's been said, maybe a little too much, that every business is a software business now. That may be an overstatement, but the ubiquity of data and computing has clearly had a profound effect on the way that many sectors of our economy operate. You know, we have seen in recent years how greater technological sophistication can create new benefits, new ways to compete, and even entire new industries. But we have also seen that new technologies can create market power that can be exerted in new and different ways. As technology grows more sophisticated, more interdependent, control in one area can have knock-on effects in other markets. For example, digital platforms, they often create powerful network and feedback effects across entire connected ecosystems that can give rise to enormous monopoly power and alter competitive incentives. Okay, so that's the big picture. But now I want to zoom in a little bit on some specific features of digital markets. I was recently rereading an old think piece from the mid-90s about why the internet would never take off. And it said that the internet was just too much of a soup of random documents with no way to figure out what was true or even what was just worth your time. I never felt that way myself, but looking back at the internet of that era of the mid-90s, it's a very easy sentiment to understand. To deal with the problems of scale that the internet first brought on, new systems were built on top of those vast troves of files that made them easier to navigate. Today, you know, it's pretty challenging to spend even a few minutes on the internet without using a ranking algorithm or a recommendation algorithm. The algorithm that selects what to show you, to choose the next item in a scroll, that can be very hard to perceive, but it can have a large influence on what people read or what people buy. Another set of algorithms that made the modern internet more useful are load balancing algorithms. You might not know you're directly interacting with these algorithms as much as you might with recommendation or ranking algorithms. I assure you though, if you've ever binge watched a new show the day it came out, just like everybody else did, or if you did any online shopping last week on Cyber Monday or Black Friday, there is a very good chance that your experience was pretty smooth. This is possible because the systems that match computing resources to user demand have significantly improved in the last 2 decades. Broadly speaking, these systems work by combining knowledge of resource availability across an entire network in real time with the ability to shift utilization among those resources dynamically on demand. And I'm telling you about this because this is another type of these systems that you may not think about very often. And that frankly, many people only notice when it's not working. When it's working well, it's really hard to see. In some cases, high-tech, anti-competitive practices in high-tech markets can be straightforward to enforce under existing paradigms. Although these new market realities, they may require new tools for analysis, at least partially. In these situations, new approaches can be helpful, not because the technologies are actually doing something different, but because they are doing things in a way that can just take more effort to observe. The algorithms I've been talking about, just three of many, but recommendation, ranking, load balancing, they impact much of how modern digital markets, the modern internet functions, but they rarely call attention to themselves. To understand technology, we have to do the work to peer behind the curtain. But if we're willing to do that, we will often find complex systems, to be very certain, but ones that are understandable and can be analyzed. However, there are other places, other situations where changes in technology may create complications for traditional antitrust tools. For example, how do we assess an agreement that may happen via algorithmic coordination? If algorithms drive collective decision-making in a way that predictably coordinates outputs or coordinates prices, can we claim that this rises to the level of illegal conclusion? So clearly, this gets complicated. So given all of that complication, how can computational tools help antitrust? Excuse me. Need a sip of water? Okay, so the same computational tools that make digital markets, technology-driven markets, more complex and sophisticated, I believe that they can also be boons to measure those same markets. And this is actually a lot of what I've done in my career as a computer scientist. I specifically do a lot of work in an area of cybersecurity we call measurement. And the field is very much what it says on the tin. We develop and use computational techniques to measure and understand large online systems, including digital markets. There are promising computational approaches that can model and keep pace with modern markets, techniques that can help detect and assess modern harms. There are three things in particular that I believe offer great promise for researchers or antitrust enforcers attempting to better understand digital markets and competition. Excuse me. The first is simply the fact that we have entered the age of data ubiquity. It's estimated that 1.7 megabytes of data is being created per person per second. I actually used to talk about this in terms of petabytes or zettabytes being created per hour or per day. But I think those volumes are actually, pretty hard to conceptualize. But you know what a megabyte is. You know how many, megabytes are created when you take a photo. And this very conversation, every word I speak is creating data that will be stored and used in the future in a variety of ways. Now, most of that data is created and stored by corporations. Companies have used this torrent of data to make their products and the markets they operate in better and more efficient. For example, the financial sector, where I spent the bulk of my industry career, has spent the last 2 decades leveraging the data that the SEC requires public companies to publish in standardized electronic formats to better understand both individual companies and entire market sectors. Of course, this is barely a drop in the bucket compared to the greater torrent of financial market data that also helps market watchers understand and price securities. But the financial world is not the only one that has experienced truly exponential growth in volume of data. Internet of Things sensor networks blanket farmers' fields. They blanket oil rigs. You might not be aware of this, but shopping malls use their Wi-Fi networks to monitor shoppers' movements through the space. Social media platforms carefully track not just user likes and shares, but mouse clicks and hover times. This rise of quantification means that it is much easier to answer factual questions about our world than it has been at any point in history. And the push by companies to measure every interaction that they have with consumers, other businesses, and the physical world means that more data exists about those companies' behavior as well. As enforcers, we are better equipped to enforce the law when we are able to take advantage of more evidence. Now, obviously, this shift to electronic communication and the push to quantify nearly everything a business does has advantages for those seeking to establish fact patterns. However, the era of big data also presents us with a dilemma. For any question about the world you might seek an answer to, there may be digital evidence out there that would contribute to analyzing that question. However, finding that evidence in the millions or even billions of pieces of data that investigators may be faced with is a task that is likely impossible with manual methods. And that is why the second thing that I want to talk to you about is the growth of the field of big data analysis. Tools like natural language processing and machine learning have been leveraged widely by businesses and governments to make all sorts of markets function more efficiently, more fairly, and also to find new insights. New York City has used data from taximeters to improve traffic light timings all across Manhattan. Businesses regularly run data science competitions where they make data sets available and they pay prizes for the most interesting uses of those data sets. Many of the analytical tools in question here for various statistical analyses and natural language processing, they are not themselves new. But over the last 15 years in particular, many free and open source code libraries have been developed that make these tools available to anyone who knows Python, R, or another programming language, rather than just statisticians. Even many nonprofit organizations operating on razor-thin budgets now use machine learning for a variety of purposes. National food bank networks, for example, now use machine learning to predict client demand for services, similarly to how businesses from agriculture to clothing retailers do. So these kinds of tools are used in two primary ways. First, and probably most obviously, they can allow us to find needles in haystacks. Recommendation and ranking algorithms are good examples of this, but algorithms that search for anomalous patterns are as well. I think, though, less well understood outside of tech is the importance of algorithms that help us understand the haystack. Load balancing algorithms are certainly something that fall into this category that I was talking about earlier. But something you might be familiar with, if you've ever searched for a flight and you've seen a graphic in a sidebar that tells you that the flights like the one you're searching for is currently in high demand or low demand, you have interacted with an algorithm that is attempting to understand the haystack. And tools like this are absolutely vital for understanding markets and market behavior. And that leads me to a newer problem that we are coming to grapple with. Sometimes the information that we need to understand a system or a market, it's not in the data itself. It's embedded in the algorithms. And this is why the third thing that I want to talk to you about is the growing field of algorithmic auditing. This is actually one of my personal technical areas of interest in my academic research career. To understand the impacts that algorithms have had on users and markets, researchers and practitioners are developing approaches to auditing algorithms and seeing how they perform in practice. This can be done with tools such as black box testing, where algorithm inputs and outputs are compared without exposing the inner working of the algorithm itself, or white box testing, where the internal workings of the algorithm are available to system validators. These techniques are already being used by hundreds of businesses as well as third parties to better understand how algorithms that the public interact with function. Algorithmic auditing doesn't necessarily seek to say why algorithms reach the decision that they do. And I should note that this is a related area called algorithm explainability, which is a much more difficult problem. So let's put that to the side for a moment. But right now, today, we have all the tools that we need to measure how nearly any algorithm functions in practice, at least in the environments considered by the audit. Obviously, some algorithms are non-deterministic, so this isn't to say we can always perfectly recreate every decision, but we can recreate the distribution of decisions very, very closely. As machine learning algorithms have come into common use, there have been several situations where they clearly exhibited biases that were harmful, from airport facial scanners that couldn't recognize flyers with darker skin tones, to sentencing algorithms that were biased against poor defendants. We know that algorithms can go wrong in ways that are simply unjust. Auditing can help us observe and correct problems like these. So algorithmic auditing can be an important tool in the toolbox of anyone who seeks to understand fact patterns as they relate to algorithmic systems. Excuse me. Okay, where are we going with all this? Antitrust enforcement has a foundational role in protecting and fostering innovation in the American economy. And this means that antitrust enforcement has to keep pace with the innovation that it enables. We have many of the tools we need at our disposal to advance and modernize our competition enforcement, but there is still more work to do in determining when and how these tools are best deployed. But the minds in this virtual room and those that couldn't join us today that are doing the scholarship that we need, that are discussing all of these problems, this serves a critical role as well. Your work will help us to continue to find new ways to understand how competition presents itself in evolving modern markets. It is no small feat to reimagine the tools that we bring to antitrust enforcement, but it is an important one. We have known since the founding of this country that monopolies are contrary to the genius of this country, this free state, that our superpower is born from the freedom to innovate. And we will continue to find ways to protect that promise, to meet the sophisticated challenges of the day with thinking and tools that are up to the moment. So thank you all for coming today. I look forward to the discussions this conversation will spark, and I look forward to meeting many of you over the next 2 days.